I'm still recovering, and it is difficult to talk and to be understood. But I want to tell my story more than ever.
There's something strangely cruel about an actor losing his voice. Because for Val Kilmer, the voice wasn't just sound, it was identity. For years, he was one of Hollywood's most magnetic stars, brilliant, charismatic, unpredictable. But the same intensity that made him fascinating on screen slowly made him difficult everywhere else. Hollywood wanted a movie star. Val wanted something deeper than fame. And somewhere between artistic obsession, public success, and personal collapse, one of Hollywood's most gifted actors slowly disappeared from the spotlight. This is what really happened to Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer was born in Los Angeles in 1959, growing up close enough to Hollywood to see the illusion early. But long before fame entered the picture, there was already a certain emotional intensity to him. He was intelligent, creative, deeply inward, the kind of person who seemed more comfortable imagining different identities than fully sitting inside his own. At just 17 years old, he became the youngest student ever accepted into Juilliard's drama division. For most young actors, that kind of achievement would have felt like a rival. For Val, it seemed to become pressure, and then tragedy entered his life early. In 1977, his younger brother Wesley drowned in a swimming pool accident. Val rarely spoke about the grief directly, but people close to him often sensed something changed afterward, a withdrawal, a heaviness, as though part of him emotionally froze there. And maybe that's why acting became so important, not just as ambition, but as escape, a way to disappear into other people for a while, a way to transform pain into performance. From the beginning, Val Kilmer approached acting differently than most young actors around him. He wasn't chasing celebrity, at least not in the usual way. He wanted legitimacy, respect.
Transformation.
Even early on, there was something unusually intense about him. Professors admired his talent, but people also noticed the perfectionism, the seriousness, the feeling that acting wasn't simply a career to Val. It was personal. Hollywood, of course, saw something simpler. He was handsome, charismatic, naturally magnetic on screen. The industry immediately recognized leading man potential, and that created tension almost instantly, because while studios saw a future movie star, Val saw himself as an artist. In comedies like Top Secret and Real Genius, audiences saw confidence, humor, and effortless charm. But underneath it, there was already resistance forming. He didn't want to become another shallow Hollywood celebrity. And sometimes that resistance came across as arrogance, sometimes as aloofness, sometimes as difficulty. But often it felt more like insecurity disguised as control. Even before major fame arrived, Val Kilmer already seemed uncomfortable with the version of himself Hollywood was trying to create. Then came Top Gun. And suddenly, Val Kilmer wasn't just a promising young actor anymore. He was a star. As Iceman, he barely needed to say much at all. The confidence, the calm, the rivalry, the icy self-control. Audiences immediately understood him. He represented a very specific kind of 1980s masculinity. Cool without trying, competitive without panic, emotionally unreadable. And ironically, it was exactly the kind of role Val himself seemed slightly uncomfortable becoming trapped inside. Because while Hollywood saw a future blockbuster leading man, Val still wanted artistic depth. That contradiction followed him everywhere. Even during success, there was often a strange emotional distance to him, almost as if fame itself felt slightly unreal, slightly disappointing. Films like Willow expanded his popularity further, turning him into one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood by the late 1980s. But unlike many stars who fully embraced celebrity culture, Val never seemed fully comfortable performing fame off screen. He could play confidence brilliantly, but in interviews there was often something guarded underneath it, something restless, as though becoming famous wasn't solving the deeper questions he carried, long before Hollywood ever noticed him. By the 1990s, Val Kilmer had become something increasingly rare in Hollywood, a genuine movie star who still behaved like a character actor. He didn't simply play roles, he disappeared into them, and nowhere was that more obvious than the doors. Playing Jim Morrison wasn't just another performance for Val, it became obsession. He studied Morrison endlessly, dressed like him, spoke like him, moved like him. People on set later admitted there were moments when it became difficult separating the actor from the man he was portraying. And maybe that blurring of identity was the point. Val seemed drawn toward characters hiding pain beneath charisma, men who performed confidence while quietly collapsing underneath it. That pattern appeared again in Tombstone. His Doc Holliday wasn't simply cool or charismatic. He was exhausted, dying lonely, a man masking fear and physical decline behind wit and elegance. Even now, many people still consider it the greatest performance of his career. Then came Heat. Working alongside legends like Al Pacino and Robert De Niro gave Val something he'd always craved: artistic legitimacy. Validation, proof that he belonged among serious actors, not just blockbuster celebrities. And then there was Batman Forever. On paper, it should have been the peak. Huge franchise, massive studio film, global fame, but strangely it also seemed emotionally hollow. Because beneath the costume, there was barely any identity left at all. And maybe that's what slowly exhausted him about Hollywood. The industry wanted recognizable brands. Val wanted transformation. Hollywood wanted consistency. Val wanted meaning. The same intensity making him extraordinary on screen was also making him increasingly difficult for the industry to contain. But strangely, the later years of Val Kilmer's life also revealed something calmer, something more honest. Without the machinery of Hollywood constantly surrounding him, he seemed softer somehow, less guarded. For years, Val had fought to prove himself as an actor, as an artist, as someone worthy of being taken seriously. But illness has a way of changing priorities. The need to impress people slowly disappears when survival itself becomes the focus. He turned increasingly toward painting, writing, spirituality, and reflection. And in the documentary Val, audiences finally saw a version of him that felt unusually unprotected. Not the movie star, not the difficult actor, just a man looking back at his life with surprising vulnerability. There was sadness there, but also acceptance. And perhaps the most emotional moment came with Top Gun, Maverick. Seeing Iceman again after all those years carried real weight because audiences weren't simply watching a character return. They were confronting time itself, aging, mortality, memory. The scene worked because it wasn't pretending. Val's physical fragility became part of the emotion, and for once, performance and reality were no longer separate things. Younger Val wanted greatness. Older Val seemed to want peace. Some actors learned how to survive Hollywood. Val Kilmer never really did, because Hollywood doesn't just reward talent. It rewards diplomacy, ego management, charm off screen, the ability to make difficult people feel comfortable. And Val often seemed incapable of pretending. By the mid 1990s, stories about his behavior had started spreading through the industry. Directors described him as intense, demanding, combative. Some actors admired his commitment, others found him exhausting. And the truth was probably somewhere in between. Val didn't approach acting like a job, he approached it like obsession. That intensity created extraordinary performances, but it also slowly isolated him. Because when someone ties their entire identity to artistic meaning, criticism stops feeling professional. It becomes personal. And underneath the confidence people saw publicly, there often seemed to be something much more fragile: insecurity, loneliness, a constant need to prove himself. The strange thing about fame is that it can amplify the parts of you already struggling underneath. And Hollywood especially has a habit of turning emotional complexity into reputation. Eventually, the narrative around Val Kilmer became larger than the work itself. He wasn't simply an actor anymore. He became difficult. And once Hollywood gives you a label like that, it rarely lets go. The tragic part is that the same qualities frustrating people off screen were often the exact qualities making him brilliant on screen. The obsession, the emotional intensity, the refusal to fake sincerity. But Hollywood prefers artists who are complicated only inside performances, not in real life. And slowly, almost quietly, the industry began moving on without him. By the early 2000s, something had clearly changed. The major studio roles became less frequent. The excitement around Val Kilmer slowly faded, and Hollywood moved on the way it usually does. Quietly, without sentiment. New stars arrived, new faces replaced old ones. And an actor once considered one of the most gifted performers of his generation slowly drifted toward the edges of the industry. But the deeper struggle wasn't really professional. It was personal. Because for actors, fame can quietly become identity. Not just what you do, but who you are. And when that attention disappears, many performers are left confronting a terrifying question: who am I without it? Then came the illness: throat cancer, surgeries, radiation treatments, years of recovery. And suddenly, the actor whose entire career had been built around voice, charisma, and presence could barely speak. There's something deeply tragic about that. Not because fame disappeared, but because performance itself became physically difficult. For most of his life, Val Kilmer communicated through characters, through confidence, charm, transformation. And now, much of that had been stripped away. The world looked at him differently. Not as the beautiful, magnetic movie star from the 1980s and 90s, but as someone visibly fragile, someone aging, someone human. And maybe for the first time in his life, there was nowhere left to hide except himself. Maybe that's the strange thing about fame. The world remembers the image, the performance, the confidence. But the person underneath it is usually much more fragile than anyone realizes. Val Kilmer spent most of his life becoming other people: rock stars, gunfighters, superheroes, legends, and he was brilliant at it. But underneath all those performances, there always seemed to be someone searching for something harder to define: meaning, peace, identity. Hollywood gave him admiration, success, and recognition, but it never fully gave him the thing he actually seemed to want: to be understood. And maybe that's why his story still resonates so deeply. Because eventually, everyone reaches the same moment. The applause fades, youth fades, beauty fades, the performance ends, and what remains is the person underneath it all. Not the character, not the celebrity, just the human being. Val Kilmer's story was never really about fame. It was about the cost of transformation, about the loneliness hidden beneath charisma, about what happens when someone spends their entire life performing strength while quietly carrying grief underneath it. And maybe in the end, after all the roles, all the success, all the conflict and reinvention, he finally became the one person he spent his whole life struggling to understand: himself.